Does he still have value, Russell Wilson? Because I think we all agree that Nathaniel Hackett's done. Does Russ still have value? And I ask that because if you're a team, or if you're the Denver Broncos, don't you at least have to kick the tires on if we wanted to just move on and start this thing all over again?
How are you going to move on?
It's the price tag that makes it almost
how are you going to move on?
Well, like if there's a team out there that says, okay, we're willing to bite the bullet, we're willing to make a move and bring in Russell Wilson. We feel like the situation is really the issue and not so much the player.
And there's always a coach or a GM out there really that feels that way, but that still is a big nut.
Well, let me say this. There's always a coach that feels like they can fix them or they're the answer.
Yeah.
And so I don't see any scenario where they're going to move on from Russell at this point. I think there's a greater scenario they move on from Nathaniel Hackett. They end up chalking that up to a bad decision and hire by George Paton. And then they go find an offensive coach who comes in and fixes it all. Like that's the reality of this. You can't imagine that, Russell Wilson's going to go somewhere else without giving up significant draft picks. And if you're that team that's giving up significant draft picks, I'm saying I'll get multiple first rounds, because you can't think that the Broncos would cut bait with that for anything less. I mean, the dead cap numbers are astronomical. Astronomical. $107 million next year. So it's not like you can release him or move on from him in that respect. You've got him under contract till 2028. Like when they made this move, it was a long-term investment. And the cap hit numbers aren't that bad, but I can't imagine you're going to throw in the towel on Russell Wilson after 1 year. I think you look at, what's been part of the issue and problem is the offense. And whether Hackett was calling the plays or not, it hasn't worked out. And so it's unfortunate for him in his first head coaching opportunity, but hopefully he learns from it, and if he gets a second chance, he'll be better from it. But I think that's usually going to be the fall guy in this case, just because of the sheer numbers of Wilson's contract.
And you think for sure it's going to be an offensive guy?
You'd have to think that, right?
Well, I mean, Dan Quinn, listen, like that's the big name that's out there.
Sean Payton.
Yeah, that too, Sean Payton. But I think if Sean Payton, looks and has some other options, like maybe if the Charger job opens up, that feels like it might be a better option.
Look at. That'd be one. But I mean, but it's interesting because they're in the same division.
Yeah.
Right.
I just wonder what's the rapport of whoever that next coach up is with Pete Carroll. Because I want to know, I want to have a conversation with Hackett, but more importantly, I want to have a conversation with Pete Carroll as to what am I getting myself into from their perspective. Now, granted, there's always the truth that is somewhere in between what Russ's truth would be and what the coach that coached him would be. But I would be collecting intel from his former OCs. I'd ask Schottenheimer about him. I just ask people about him. Because I just feel like the common denominator here with everything that's going on is the perception of who Russell Wilson is. I think that's like kind of the thing. And it's not – I don't feel like this is a scenario where you call his character into question. He's a high-character guy. There's no debating that. There's no disputing that. But in some cases where you have high value, high character guys, it's become very evident from former players and teammates as to how they feel about Russell Wilson.
I feel bad for him now. I think we're at the point where it's been open season on him all year long. And look, I've made plenty of jokes. Everybody's made plenty of jokes about it. But just seeing him yesterday, like down in that game, trailing, started playing his ass off, and then when he got up after getting spiked on the turf like that just looked like a guy who's taking a beating. And he's
literally, figuratively, and literally.
And I kind of feel, and I found myself rooting for him yesterday, going, man, I hope this isn't just the end, because I think people are starting to look at big picture. Well, what does this do for his legacy? This season's gone so poorly. What does it do for this? You can't be that good of a quarterback for that long and it all just be smoke and mirrors, right? This is just an awful situation that he's in, and I'm hoping that it's just 1 year because I'd love to see him get back to playing. Because when he's good, he's entertaining, he's fun to watch, and you saw some of the old Russell Wilson yesterday, and then he ends up with a goose on the side of his head that you could hang clothes off of. So he took a nice little pop there. But I find myself rooting for him now because I do feel bad with some of the conversations that are being had about him. So maybe I'm the only one.
Yeah, I feel like to LaVar's point about character or how he's I don't know represented himself. I'm not sure even how to describe it. It feels like he went from being a guy that everyone wanted to root for to like the villain in literally an offseason.
Yeah.
Now, granted, maybe some of that was building up in the locker room in Seattle for a period of time. We weren't privy to that on the outside. My time in Seattle being there with him, he wasn't that. They didn't even win a Super Bowl yet. They won one later on that year. And at that point in time, he was a guy who came in, worked hard, did everything, was extremely regimented, and just did everything they asked of him. And it wasn't like that. So I never saw that side of him at any point in time during the time in which I'd known him. Now, I've talked to former players who've said as much, though, that he's changed. And I don't know if it's Sierra or whoever else has kind of molded him into this.
I don't blame him.
You have to acknowledge the fact that
you're stupid
when you come in before the season even starts and you've got this whole let's ride and you're trademarking it and you're so focused on everything else outside of football. It's like, come on, man, you missed the point. Seattle tried to trade your ass. And now you finally got to a new destination with everything to prove, and it seems like between a clothing store in Denver, a merch line, the trademark, like all these other business ventures, like that's great. But don't forget what happens to all that if you're not winning.
Yeah.
Like they don't make steakhouses with coaches and players' names on them when they lose. Like that ain't how it works.
What's the name of Urban Meyer's place that honors?
Well, it's the Urban Meyer Pine House. They have a 7-0 room,
okay.
But before you butcher that, yeah.
Yeah, 7-0 room.
Yeah, I just want to make sure before, because this is the classic Jonas on live air.
Right.
Going in a direction he thinks he knows, and then just swerves right into a ditch.
That's all right. Listen, it happens, Like that's post-show production. Like that's what that's there for. I mean, it's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
By the way, does he really have a clothing store, Russell Wilson, in Denver?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Good for
it's
him.
called like the Good Man brand or I don't know. You have to look it up.
The Good Man brand.
Is it, where's
Something
that,
like that.
16th Street or what? Is that where it's at?
Are you looking on a map right now?
No, I'm just like, that's Lodo.
Go look at like Market or Larimer.
Yeah.
Yes, Lodo, which stands for
Lodo.
Lower Downtown. Yeah, that'd be that area.
I'm just talking Denver here. Kind of a Denver guy.
Don't you love LaVar when he brings up a Google map and he just starts like...
Hey, LaVar.
He has no map
No
up.
map. I was in Denver for 36 hours once.
No map.
All right. Saw it all.